All right, it's time to start the second presentation. And this one actually is titled Space Ready, and it deals essentially with doing an analysis and comparison of the existing space agencies, and then based on that, provide recommendations for emerging space nations. And the same thing will be 40 minutes and then 20 minutes for questions and answers. Let's start. Thanks.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the first and only episode of the greatest show in the galaxy, Space Ready. We are your hosts, Ali.
And I'm Astro Tim. And today, Space Ready, the launchpad for emerging agencies, is the name of the game. And the players of this game are the participants behind me who are representing the international agencies and entities who have agencies in space. And what they're going to be doing today is trying to convince you and our special guest to adopt their aims and activities, structure, and practices. So let's welcome our special guest down.
Our special guest today is an emerging space nation who goes by the name M and has a special interest in establishing a successful space agency. Please welcome her to the stage.
So, let me tell you how this game is played. Our participants were each interviewed about the agencies that they represent. And these interviews were cut down into different rounds that talk about the different aspects of their agencies. After each round, we have then gone out and sought questions and responses from experts in the field. The final round is a chance for the participants to, live in front of you, give their pitch as to why their way is the best. So, without further ado, let's give a big round of applause for
the Canadian Space Agency.
The tiny National Space Administration.
The Indian Space Research Organization.
Woo! Luxembourg.
Malaysia's Space Agency.
USA's National Aeronautics and Space Administration.
The National Institute of Aerospace, Spain.
What a distinguished group of participants so far. Next, we have the New Zealand Space Agency.
The South African Space Agency.
And last but definitely not least, the United Arab Emirates Space Agency.
Now that you've had a look at the participants, Em, tell us why you're here.
Well, as an emerging space nation, I'm interested in improving my citizens' lives through space applications, becoming a worthy contributor and beneficiary of the global space economy, and setting a great example for other space nations to come.
Those are definitely some great reasons to be here. And as a welcome to you, Em, we have a little gift. This is a rocket that was recently flown by the participants of the Southern Hemisphere Space Studies Program 2018. We hope that it serves as an inspiration to you. Please be seated.
Thank you very much.
Next, we're going to hear about program aims. Let's roll that tape.
The aim of the South African National Space Agency is to facilitate socio-economic development, particularly through the use of Earth observation data, as well as to develop a domestic capability in space science and engineering.
The objectives of the United Arab Emirates Space Agency is to develop a sustainable and world-class space sector in the UAE.
To explore outer space and enhance understanding of the Earth and the cosmos, and to utilize outer space for peaceful purposes, promote human civilization and social progress, and benefit the whole of mankind.
The mission of the Indian space program is to harness space technology for national development while pursuing space science research and planetary exploration.
The objective of NASA broadly is to reach for new heights and to reveal the unknown for the benefit of human mankind.
Those are definitely some sky-high goals. Tell us, Em, what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very interested in national development, space exploration, and science that will benefit the whole of mankind.
Well, you know what they say. Shoot for the moon, and if you miss, your floating corpse will be a testament to your failure forever. Wait, maybe we should listen to the experts instead.
Agency has completely different aims depending on if they are starting up, if they are big, mature ones. Actually, some agencies are actually private. I've found some people that start in the private sector in South America, and then they get more engagement from the government. So I would say that depends on the maturity of the agency and the emerging nation that's actually producing the program.
For Australia, I think the important part is really the stuff that excites the next generations, learning about the universe. I think that's a very important part of an agency.
ESA was expressly set up in order to do things which our national space agencies cannot do. So this is one of the key missions of ESA, to do things where single countries and single capacities are not enough.
So, Em, what do you think about those expert comments?
I think it's definitely true that agency aims will depend on how mature their space technology is, and it's really important to get the next generation excited about space. ESA's approach of pooling international resources to achieve higher aims is really interesting too.
You're right, Em. Aims need to be defined based on a certain context that every nation has for itself. Their economy, the challenges that they face, their society. Some nations set really lofty goals for themselves and then put themselves on the path to achieve them. The UAE Space Agency is a great example of that.
It could also be beneficial to establish goals in line with existing goals, such as the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, like our South African participant have done. So, now that you've got your sights on what you're aiming for, it's time for round two. We've got to find out how you're actually going to achieve them. Let's hear about some activities.
Since the 1970s, space-related technologies have been used by Malaysia for telecommunications and Earth observation purposes. And Malaysia does continue to prioritise these activities through the MESAT and RASASAT satellites. The Space Agency, which we're quite proud of, is also pioneered the guidelines for performing Islamic rites at the International Space Station. The guidebook serves as a platform for future Muslims in space with regards to balancing mission objectives and performing religious obligations.
Some of the most important activities that the United Arab Emirates Space Agency is undertaking includes an unmanned space probe by 2021 to orbit Mars, and also their 100-year vision to colonise Mars by 2117.
New Zealand Space Agency engages in a number of activities. Firstly, they act as a regulatory regime to ensure safe, responsible, and secure use of space from New Zealand. Secondly, the agency supports launches by the company Rocket Lab, the world's first private orbital launch site. Other activities include developing and applying satellite data to agriculture, hazard management, oceanology, and meteorology.
The Spanish Space Agency, INTA, has activities that cover application technologies in aeronautical, space, land, and naval areas, conducting all types of tests to check and certify materials, components, subsystem, and application system in their fields of activity.
From a program's perspective, ISRO is currently engaged in launch vehicle development, launch port operation, satellite design and integration, interplanetary missions, payload development for satellite-based telecommunication, optical and microwave remote sensing, navigation, meteorology, and remote sensing data analysis.
In 2017, we passed legislation enabling the utilisation of space resources. There is a lot of talk about asteroid mining, and we feel that it is a good venture to pursue.
Well, that's quite the laundry list of exciting and challenging activities. Are those the sort of things you'd like to do, Em?
Absolutely. I was impressed with the variety of activities that space agencies perform. They covered everything from building rockets to setting the rules and even offering guidance on the social and religious aspects of space activity.
The only activities that I can think of right now are putting on a movie and ordering in fast food. But let's hear from the experts instead.
The space agencies usually do have three different tasks. The first is to set up a space plan or space program. The second one is to do procurement and award contracts. And the third one is to represent the country on the international level.
I think really getting involved in international projects which are going to benefit the environment and help solve some of the problems we have today. It's better agricultural management, it's understanding the environment better for all the challenges we have. So that's more of the global aspects I think are really important.
Some agencies are interested in getting into the field because of the economic return that will bring from being engaged in such a discipline. The space program is close to $350 billion, and so some agencies, especially some of the emerging nations, are trying to capitalize on that fact and trying to establish agencies or offices, space offices, to be able to bring some economic returns.
A lot of countries try to separate the military applications out of the civil space agency applications. I think that's probably a good thing. You might have to have other bodies to work on some of the military applications, but you should be thinking of the peaceful use of space, which is a strong driver a lot of the countries believe in.
Clearly, having a plan which defines what activities to partake in is very important for space agencies. What do you think, Em?
Well, a number of the experts mentioned getting involved at the international level, didn't they? I think the peaceful use of outer space is really important to me as well.
That's true, and the activities that an agency takes on will determine the support that they get from the public and the industry. On the international level, the partnerships are very important for the agencies to determine their activities as well. Emerging space agencies can partner with strong international supporters, and with these actors, they can achieve relatively quick wins.
I agree. In fact, I wish I was an experienced actor.
Okay, let's move on. So agencies have a wide variety of structures. Oh, sorry. And we're going to move on to the next round and hear from our participants on their structures.
the United Arab Emirates Space Agency is affiliated to the Council of Ministers, but it has an independent legal personality, which means it's able to enjoy financial independence, administrative independence, and it has the legal capacity to carry out all necessary tasks to achieve the agency's goals.
Well, the Canadian Space Agency reports to the Minister of Innovation, Science and Economic Development, and so as a result of that, it doesn't really have a high degree of autonomy.
We are a government organization of the People's Republic of China. There are 6 departments and 3 centers under the CNSA. The centers are mainly established for the efficient management of major projects. They are Lunar Exploration and Space Program Center, Earth Observation Program Center, and Space Remote Sensing Demonstration Center.
Structurally, the Indian Space Research Organization falls under the Department of Space, which reports to the Prime Minister of India. ISRO is headed by its chairman, who is also serving as the Secretary of the Department of Space. Antrix Corporation, a private limited company controlled by and wholly owned by the Government of India, serves as the commercial and marketing wing of ISRO for international customers.
NASA consists of the central organization plus 10 centers and several facilities. The NASA administrator is in charge of the agency and is nominated by the President of the United States and confirmed by a vote in the Senate.
We've pursued a very specific structure when establishing our space industry and space policy. We've gone for a decentralized approach.
Those are some pretty interesting points on the structure. What do you think, Em?
Yeah, it was interesting that some can operate independently while others are closely aligned with the government. Having a commercial arm sounds interesting as well.
Structure is certainly a complex issue, but if you get it right, you'll be in good standing. You can probably guess I'm building up to hear what the experts have to say on the matter.
To be able to be effective and efficient, you need actually to have an efficient way of managing it. If it's too bureaucratic, obviously it will be a lot of constraints, it will be difficult to have anything done. At the same time, you can't be just too free loose because the space business is very risky. So you need to make sure you have regulations and laws and procedures adhered to.
I think it's really important that they operate at a higher level. They're not influenced by various departments and things like that. So I think autonomy is really, really important. As long as the government drives those goals, their mission statement that's agreed on at the highest levels in government.
So best reporting structure to the country by the space agency is that we can report at the same time of every year or every several years, and it can have the analysis of the success of its missions, policies, goals, and the results.
The structure of an agency is going to depend very, very much on the goals and objectives set for that agency and the political context in which it exists. You might do very well to have an agency whose primary role is to coordinate the functions of departments that already exist, a small agency, for example.
One thing which is very important and which certainly is also important for your work is that nowadays the space agencies are reporting to economics ministries. Previously, they have been reporting to ministries of education or science. And this certainly is already a very important message. This also relates then to issues like the funding mechanisms and the activities the space agencies are conducting.
Some very interesting points in there, Em. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree, Ali. Space is certainly a risky business, but I hope I can have an efficient structure to enable me to achieve my goals.
You're right, Em. Designing a space agency is personalized to every nation, and one size does not fit all. There were agencies in the 50s and 60s, but those structures might not really be in vogue today. We do have agencies such as the New Zealand space agencies, which are smaller but more dynamic. Or Luxembourg is an example where the space sector is completely decentralized.
Speaking of Luxembourg brings to mind their very successful financial sector. They probably say that money makes the world go round, but actually it's the laws of conservation of energy. But actually it's related to the orbit and velocity size of that orbit, something like that. Was that two correct answers, G2? Let's go and hear what the experts have to say.
Sources of funding for Sansa include money appropriated from Parliament, fees, donations, and royalties. The funding is reviewed once a year, and recently there's been a decrease in the funding, which has limited our ability to develop satellites.
As of March 2017, the UAE Space Agency has garnered over $5.2 billion from government, private, and semi-government support so far.
The public funding for HINTA by the Spanish government amounts to about US dollars 170 millions, of which 46% is spent on the space sector.
So the agency makes annual space budgets and conducts reviews every year.
The budget for the Indian space program gets revised annually and has consistently grown over the last few years. For the last financial year, it stood close to $1.4 billion US dollars.
As a federal agency, NASA receives its fundings from the annual federal budget passed by the United States Congress. NASA's annual budget is approximately 0.5% of the whole federal budget. In 2017, we received about $19 billion with similar funding in 2018.
So there was quite a range of budgets and funding models there, wasn't there? What do you think, Em?
Yeah, hearing the word billions scares me a bit, but the return from these agencies' investments have definitely been impressive.
Money, 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 money. Let's hear from the experts.
Agency funding is obviously it's the most critical thing. Depending on what funding, that determines what goals you have, what strategy you're going to have, how many people you can hire.
The most important thing with the agency is having long-term goals allows you to mature and develop those goals in a much better way. I think one of the problems the US have is that every year the Congress goes back and revisits like goals and funding, and that's very disruptive to a program. So long-term goals with a long-term funding model, I think, is really, really important, like out to at least 10 years plus.
Funding structure of the country. Perhaps for some country, 1 year is better. For other country, several years is better. According to the mission of space activities, many missions will last several years. So in my opinion, perhaps several years of funding is better.
True that space agencies are empowered to do public-private partnerships, and I think this is something which is true for all European space agencies.
So funding is definitely very critical, and the frequency of the updating, frequency of the budgetary updates is also very important. What do you think, Tim?
Well, I definitely have long-term goals I'd like to achieve, so I'm going to have to think about it carefully.
That's absolutely right, Em. The programs that an agency wants to fund should be realistic. It all depends on how much money a state can set aside for the long term. This is because space projects can take over a number of years to actually come to realization, particularly when it comes to space exploration.
And new high-tech capabilities take a large amount of time, capital, and expertise to develop. States that want to develop something new and innovative may not have the sufficient funds and resources to do this.
This is why public-private partnerships should be considered. When these are managed properly, they can allow a country to build up capabilities within its industry in niche areas and help the sectors grow, as well as delivering great outcomes for the agency. For example, our representative from Canada used their robotics expertise to develop the Robotic Canadarm, which assembled the International Space Station in space.
Clearly, public, private, and international partnerships are very important, and all agencies need to strive to have significant outreach programs to do this. That moves us to the next round.
An example model of the UAE employing public engagement includes the ambitious 100-year Mars mission. This aims to internally grow the space sector through the engagement of Emirati citizens.
Canada has a cooperation agreement with the European Space Agency, which allows Canadian companies to submit bids on ESA projects and form working relationships with European companies, despite being geographically distant. Their partnership has increased the number of domestic business opportunities, and there have been huge benefits for the Canadian economy.
Most of Malaysia's space ventures have been in collaboration with various international existing spacefaring states already. Satellite technology, for instance, has been built with assistance from the UK, France, from the Russian and the South Korean space agencies. The first Malaysian astronaut to travel into space was a project sponsored by the Russian Space Agency.
For a space agency like New Zealand, the best model of international collaboration is commercialization. The relationship that has received the most media attention is the collaboration with Rocket Lab. New Zealand also have a bilateral agreement with ESA. They are a member of UN COPUOS and have ratified the Outer Space Treaty, Rescue and Return Treaty, and the Liability Convention.
Due to my inclusion in the Ministry of Defense, the major stakeholders are the military establishment. While the primary nature of the program carried out by the agency are for defense programs, there are also some commercial programs in play. The most significant is the Ispasat constellation of satellites.
Since 2011, China has signed 43 space cooperation agreements. We have taken part in United Nations-sponsored activities and other international organizations.
ISRO partners with many international agencies like NASA, the European Space Agency, and the French Space Agency for executing either joint or multilateral space missions.
NASA cooperates widely with the space agencies of other countries and has gained great success in many international projects, such as the International Space Station.
Most of our collaborative efforts they do include other agencies, but we also make a point of involving other companies, organisations, commercial entities on a global scale.
The Malaysian Space Agency relies greatly on industry for upstream activities. These include development, construction, launching, and operation of space systems. The agency prefers to concentrate on management, policies, and planning.
Sansa's engagement with the commercial industry in South Africa is primarily as contractors for satellite projects. So, for example, Denel Space Tech has been contracted to develop the EO Satellite 1, which will be used for Earth observation.
So the UAE Space Agency employs a number of industry models. One of these is their cooperation with the private satellite communications company Yahsat and their collaboration on many various projects.
I've got a space technology development program which provides funds to breakthrough ideas and academia to bolster the Canadian space sector.
We are constantly committed to build an integrated and open system, which comprises of system integrators, specialized contractors, market suppliers, and public service providers.
The Luxembourg Space Program is dedicated, it's prime mover, its mission is to engage with industrial commercial entities. We are involved with some universities as well, namely 2 within Luxembourg, but we're most excited by the 30 companies that are currently located within Luxembourg.
Looks like the agencies are investing significantly in partnerships and multilateral relationships. What do you think, Em?
Yeah, well, like Malaysia, I certainly wouldn't mind if another nation sponsored one of my citizens to be an astronaut.
Actually, I wouldn't mind being an astronaut myself. It's obviously very important to build great relationships with many people and organisations in order to be successful in space. Let's hear what the experts have to add.
especially establishing the agency, come out with its missions and goals, they certainly need to have a forum where they get buy-in from the public, because agencies in the past have had challenges with their funding because some public thinks, well, what are we doing stuff in space for when we've got problems on Earth? So I think engagement and getting people to understand the importance of space is very, very important.
Philae and Rosetta were known by children all over Europe and in many cases beyond as sort of real beings. And ESA nourished that with graphic novels about the spacecraft, with cartoons on the website. It was easy to identify with the machine when it had a name, it had a personality, it had a cute set of icons. Jade Rabbit was turned into a personality during its lunar day. That final message from Jade Rabbit saying that it was going asleep, it was getting very cold, was a tearjerker for lots of Chinese, but it also made them bond with a mechanical object that their country had managed to land on the moon. There are only, 3 countries that have ever landed anything on the moon.
Most of our space agencies in Europe are also cooperating with countries or other agencies outside Europe, and the key principle for that is no exchange of funds.
I see a big synergy between industry and government for any sustainable program in any place that you go to. There always has to be both facets working on it. You cannot have just government, you can't have private industry. It has to be complement to each other in terms of industry and government for sure.
I think most importantly, you need a trusted relationship where the industry are willing to invest as well into an area because they see the benefits to their workforce and, I guess, the growth of their company.
Thank you, experts, for that great insight. Well, it's that time. We've come to the final round. This is where the contestants, the participants behind me, are going to give their pitches to you and to the emerging space nation M as to why their way is the best. All right, let's start with Canada.
Well, M, there's a lot to learn from the Canadian Space Agency because we've done a lot despite a relatively small budget, as the Space Agency's budget is only about 0.08% of the national budget. One of the ways we've done this is by learning to choose activities based on our expertise and also collaborating internationally. For example, realising our robotics expertise early, we were able to contribute the Canada arm to the International Space Station program and globally put Canada on the map.
Let's move on to China.
Okay, hello, Em. As China has recently made leaps and bounds in space technology, and China, we are one of the 2 space agencies with vehicles able to take humans into space. And as always seen, China has landed a rover on the moon. And our space program is geared towards building a satellite and our own space station, but maybe an international one too, and the deep space exploration. So in China, space holds a very important position, both for the benefit of our country and also for the whole mankind. So maybe especially for you. And with efficiency and fast development, I think I strongly recommend you to consider about it.
Thank you, China. Isro, it's your turn.
Well, you already know that India has one of the most diverse and dynamic of all sports programs in the world. Over the years, we have developed such reliable launch services that the entire world is flocking to us today to launch their satellites. We have such state-of-the-art communication, navigation, and remote sensing satellites up there in the sky. Looking at our success, I definitely think that you would want to follow our model if you want to grab the world's attention.
Luxembourg, take it away.
I hope that you've noticed by now that Luxembourg has a vibrant and thriving space economy. We are global leaders in space policy and have recently passed legislation to enable the utilisation of space resources. This has started an entirely new industry in space mining. Furthermore, we closely collaborate with many international agencies and partners and are a prominent member of the European Space Agency.
Great to hear, Luxembourg. Let's move on to Malaysia.
Well, we collaborate immensely with international space agencies for a host of programs. Our aerospace industry contributes to 2% of our GDP. Our greatest achievements are our geo-telecommunications constellations and our equatorial imaging satellites.
NASA, you've got the mic.
We at NASA are the world's premier space agency. For the past 60 years, we have made outstanding achievements, such as placing people on the moon, establishing a manned space station in Earth orbit, and exploring other planets and celestial bodies. Moreover, we have got our greatest minds working on new and exciting missions, such as leading the way for humans to land on Mars.
Thank you, NASA. Let's hear from Spain.
When it comes to space, INTA is at the forefront of international cooperation. We operate as a public research organization, and we're one of the major contributors to the European Space Agency's budget. And we have worked closely with NASA as well. We have some great programs like Madrid Deep Space Communication Complex and the EI Silo launch site.
New Zealand.
Hi, in my opinion, our New Zealand government is very keen in encouraging space entrepreneurship. And our position in South Pacific Ocean offers perennially clear sky and a great selection of launch angles. So just for this very reason, we establish ourselves in response to the advent of a commercial project with Rocket Lab, and we are the first nation to build or to hold a private orbital launch range. Therefore, you can see our space agency's regulation is pragmatic and flexible, and it will guarantee our nation to be staying at the forefront of space-related activities.
Thank you very much, New Zealand. Let's hear from South Africa.
So why should you consider South Africa? Well, we're the most active country in space on the African continent. Additionally, we've been very proactive in pursuing international collaboration with agencies in countries such as Germany, the UK, Japan, and Russia. Additionally, we've made use of Earth observation data to derive real socioeconomic benefit for our nation in just the last 7 years.
UAE, you've got the closing remarks.
Well, the UAE Space Agency might be young, as we were only established in 2014, but in 4 very short years, we've proven ourselves as one of the leading space agencies in West Asia and the Middle East, and it's only a matter of time before we've made a truly global impact. Executing our once ambitious aim of interplanetary exploration, we're one of the few agencies worldwide to have a Mars mission in the works. We're even sending a probe to the planet by 2021.
Thank you very much, UAE. So with that, we've heard from all our participants, and the time draws near for Em to choose her favourite models.
Before you do that, we've got some recommendations laid out for you, which will help you make an informed decision on the way forward.
The first one is that the aims that an agency sets should be specifically defined, consistent with its national interests, and in line with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals.
The activities that the agencies need to partake in should be in conjunction with commercial partnerships to maximize their nation's technical and economic capacity. The activities should also promote global partnerships and to understand the intricacies of inter-agency coordination and to support their own agency's development. To garner public support, their activities should definitely be positioned in a way that the public can get on board and the activities can take off.
The funding model should be transparent and to encourage public and private investment and collaboration. The agency should have well-defined programs that enable the state to allocate adequate funds for the realisation of their goals. They should consider undertaking public-private partnerships for the state to develop new high-tech capabilities and the growth of their sector.
For structure, you may consider making your agency part of an existing ministry or a ministry on its own. It totally depends on your government's own structure and its own resources. However, a simplified bureaucratic oversight will definitely expedite the authority for the approval of funds and the activities themselves. Now that you've had a chance to hear out the participants as well as our recommendations, I believe it's time we hear your thoughts. Please join us in the center.
So, Em, please, tell us what you think.
It's been wonderful hearing from the space agencies that have gathered here today. It's a very interesting mix. Some are well established and accomplished, others are younger and on a very exciting path, potentially more relatable. I'm looking around and every one of you are brilliant at what you do.
You've got to pick a winner, Em. You've got to pick a winner.
Well, today I think I'm the winner. I've learnt so much about space agencies, their aims, structure, funding and activities. I feel empowered with information and I feel confident I can represent my own nation's interests in space.
We wish the best of luck to all the countries on path to establishing their own successful space agencies, with a special shout out to Australia, our host.
Thank you for being a part of our show today. We are going to invite up our research and editorial team leads, and we'll be taking your questions. Do we have any questions?
Okay, thank you so much. That was very interesting and very well presented as well. I mean, I really enjoyed it. I have actually a lot of questions, but if I can only have just the one, then I will focus on this one. There was particularly at the end some mention about outreach and the little pandas or whatever they were, little figurines. So that obviously, I think, goes towards marketing and making the people of the nation aware. But if you're looking at distinctive assets, I would say that the things that most excite the population of a country are discoveries going into the unknown, which is also what Peter mentioned several times, that if you have to inspire a country into having a space agency, those things need to be, at the forefront. And I believe to some extent India has done that. So why wasn't there more specific mention of these aspects like the big discoveries and astronauts? Those are great distinctive assets for space agencies.
Thank you for your question. Although there is no specific mention of one particular discovery in the executive summary, there is one that appears in the full report. And you are very right in saying that India has done very well in this aspect, and we have taken up a case study on the Mars orbiter mission of Mars, which really ignited the passion and the imagination of the entire Indian population, and which appears in the final report. So that's a very good example. Thank you.
I'd like to add a further example. NASA has an excellent outreach program. They have a whole division within NASA dedicated to public education, school education, and other forms of outreach, including a vibrant social media presence. I think the point that the report was trying to make is to highlight to new agencies the need to communicate the benefits of all the space activities to their nation. Some nations don't have the capacity to send astronauts and to explore the universe. However, the fact that they've got Earth observation and other vital data usages of space will significantly help their people in the development, such as South Africa. So communicating that also helps the nation, even if it's not actually sending rovers to Mars. Thank you.
So I have a question. Well, first of all, I think it was a really good review. I learned a whole lot about a whole lot of agencies, which was great. So that was very well done. A lot of research went into it. I guess just the engineering me wants to try and say, how do you work out that you've been successful? So, you kind of have a set of requirements that you basically want to try and meet. So this may not be possible in this case, and maybe it's a crazy question, but have you thought of a way that you can assess the success of the various agencies? And I mean, there's obviously things that are very subjective, like you're getting a man on the moon. What does that mean? How much money did that earn us? How many smiles did it make? What is the assessment that you can do? Did you look at anything like that to try and, I guess, help us know if we are on, how we know if we were successful or weren't?
Yeah, I am very happy that that question has come from an engineer, and the engineer within me is very eager to answer that question. So I would say that we indeed have done an assessment as to how the success of a particular program or an agency has to be done vis-a-vis the aims that it has set out for itself during its conception or during the years of its formation. So taking the example of a satellite, let's say a remote sensing satellite, we would look at how that remote sensing satellite data has been passed on to the prospective agencies and what has been the utilization of the data. And that, in fact, is a very good metric of the measure of the success of that particular program.
I'd like to extend that discussion somewhat, possibly by looking at Canada. I've picked Canada because on the table in your report, they're about midway down the list with $500 million of investment per year. And I'm wondering how M is going to choose what level of investment to make. So it comes back to the same question, what do I get from my inputs? What's the return on investment? And also, what threshold should I set that? So if I go to Malaysia at 8 million, or at Canada at $500 million, where should I be making that decision? So maybe Canada might like to respond, or M might like to respond, or editors might like to respond.
Do you want to take it? Or?
So the question was about setting thresholds for how much money. Well, I think as we were outlining in the aims at the start, it does depend on the context of the nation. So a nation like South Africa might be more appropriate to set sustainable development goals in line with what the government wants. But it's just very dependent. So I think an average amount of spending is $5 per capita for a nation. So that's probably something that they might start to look at. But I think, it's just quite contextual on the nation.
So we, in the report, in the funding especially, we did do you could find a table there. It has the per capita spending, how much every citizen of the specific country spend on activities, or the money that they spend goes towards activities dedicated to space. The overall amount of money, like whether it's $500 million, or it's 8 million or 10 million, also always depends on the economic capacity of that country, how much resources it is willing to divert towards space activities, and what fits in with its national agenda. But one thing that we definitely were able to pinpoint was the amount of money in US dollars that every citizen spends. So the higher ones, like for example, Luxembourg spends really high per person, it's over $300. Somewhere above $10 per person. That's the amount that we came to for agencies that are considered or perceptionally considered very successful.
I think the main advice that we wanted to provide to space agencies in the report is to choose programs that are both beneficial for the country and also realistic as to what they can achieve with the funds that they have available in order to maximize the benefit. And then the funding structure is also very important, to structure the funding arrangements within the agency to allow them to have the flexibility and the stability in order to make those programs a success.
In front of you, Tim.
Okay, so if I can ask, therefore, another question as a follow-through. I think, in fact, it's a two-pronged question. So the Canadian Space Agency clearly collaborates a lot with ESA. I mean, they are a member of ESA. And however, we heard in one of the interviews that they depend from a ministry. So with regard to how they can interface, therefore, with the directives that ESA has for its members to do certain things, if the ministry doesn't want to approve a budget, I mean, how does that work? Is there any information about that? And then the second one, so that I don't have to ask for the microphone later on, while I do understand that countries need to be aware of their, let's call them limitation for want of a better word, but the question that usually is raised whenever I speak about space in Australia or anywhere else, there's always someone in the audience that goes, but we have so many problems that we have to address on Earth, why would we be spending money in space? And therefore I was wondering specifically from the Indian perspective, because you guys obviously are very proud about your achievements in space. So how does that actually help translate for the benefit of the country in the sense of having very, very good missions to somewhere else like Mars? But obviously you must think that that actually does translate into some tangible benefits. So if you could elaborate on that after the Canadian answer. Thank you.
Sorry, can I hear the question again?
Yes, how does the minister that oversees the Canadian agency interface then with the European Space Agency missions? Because the European Space Agency has some particular, for all the member states have to agree to do several things within 10 years or 5 years. And if the ministry from which the Canadian agency depends then doesn't want to fund those things, how does that happen? How is this interface easy? In the sense, obviously, Canada is doing it. How is it making it happen?
Well, the European Space Agency has got kind of optional and compulsory kind of funding options, so they can opt in and out. So I think they kind of choose that depending on what they want. But I don't think we kind of went into like that specific detail of how they interacted, and just looked more at a broad structural kind of approach.
Yeah, but I think that's a question that's going to be raised at some point in Australia, I would imagine as well. So it would have been interesting to know how that works.
The second part, do you want to take care of it? Yeah.
I'm really happy, Graziella, that you asked this question about India and its successes with its space programs and how it has managed to continue to garner support from the public with respect to its programs. I would cite two particular examples to illustrate my point. One takes me back to the 1970s. In 1975, when DTH television was not around, India was the first country to conduct a satellite instructional television experiment. That's the one-of-a-kind experiment in the world wherein remote villagers were able to receive TV signals from studios which were separated by thousands of kilometers. And this really showed to the entire nation the benefits of the space program and helped fund and garner support for the future telecommunication programs of ISRO. Second, coming to the remote sensing program, if you go back to the 90s and browse through a few Indian newspapers and the cyclones that often hit the southeastern coast of India, you would probably find mention of tens of thousands of people being affected and thousands of them probably losing their lives. Come to current day, there is a cyclone, there is a typhoon, and the number of deaths can probably be counted on fingers. That's the change that the Indian remote sensing program has done to the country in terms of prediction of natural catastrophes. And that is another aspect that has really helped ISRO gain public support. So when we move on to ambitious projects like Mars, it's the public that is behind ISRO and says, yes, you have achieved modest targets first, and now you have every right to prove something that is extraordinary. Thank you.
So actually next we're going to try and do it without the mic. The policy writer in me comes and thinks...
sorry,
you want the mic?
We're recording.
Okay, sorry. The policy writer in me comes to the point of, in your investigations, were you aware of any challenges that informed or changed directions of the different space agencies to where they are now? Because it's very unlikely that they are now where they started in how they've structured and how they're funded and what they're doing and whether they're autonomous or not.
So if I understand your question correctly, the question is how the recent changes in the space world has impacted the policy decisions in different space agencies?
Yes, and a little bit further than that, of how it's changed different countries' perceptions of what their space agency is. So, we're looking at Australia not having one, and if we were to develop policy around that, what it looks like now is unlikely to be what it looks like in 10 years' time. And that's partly because of challenges, but also things obviously change in the world of space.
Thank you for the question. Two examples that I'd mention. One is Luxembourg, which I'll cover now, and the other one would be ISRO's change in their expansion of programs with their early successes. So Luxembourg has had a long relationship with the ESA, I believe 2 decades before they became an actual member. In recent times, especially with what they've identified in financial opportunity, they are expanding very, very broadly throughout the private space economy. They've set up, so under the Ministry of the Economy, they've now established Lux Innovation. That's expanded onto the Luxembourg Space Cluster. From there, they've also expanded on to have spaceresources.lu, which is dedicated towards being able to explore space mining and asteroid mining. This is all new policy that, bluntly put, was only available because they are decentralised and have a great deal of flexibility in their model. Sean, if you wanted to.
So there is apparently a very visible shift in the Indian space policy that's happening too, especially in sight of Space 2.0. We have recently come up with a draft of the Indian space law that is out there on the website. Although India had had a space program for almost half a century now, ISRO didn't have a space policy. But with the changes that now we see in the space worlds, it's imminent to have a space policy. And that's where ISRO has rightly realized the need for a space policy. It has come up with a draft policy law now, which is out there on the ISRO website for public scrutiny and feedback.
I think one of the broader recommendations that was made in the report to new agencies is to essentially pick a few smaller or reachable and realistic targets to begin with, and then expand from then onwards, depending on the success of those initial targets and the sort of funding and support that the agency gets in the long run. I think there needs to be a certain level of flexibility within agencies to shape their future targets and mandate as required by the changing nature of the space sector.
Can I just ask a related question? I haven't had the opportunity to read the report, just see the presentation. You made a comment early on that every country is different, has different aims and goals, and wants to achieve different things. And then you come up with a set of sort of common recommendations, which I sort of struggled a little bit with. In your analysis, did you manage to do a sort of strengths and weaknesses analysis? It's related to the policy development. What has worked for different agencies under different circumstances? Because I think as a report that's going to a country considering developing their own space agency, sort of knowing what the experience has been in these other agencies, where they've been successful, where there have been failures, and what lessons have been learned, is a really valuable thing to inform that decision.
Thank you for the question. That's a very valid point, and which we have pondered over in the report. So I'll cite the example of New Zealand and that of Luxembourg, which are rather nascent space agencies. Luxembourg doesn't have a unique space agency as well. So that's the kind of shift that we are now observing, in the sense that most of these nascent organizations are looking for a more of a regulatory and a framework establishing role rather than being a space actor themselves, whereas the older ones are more satisfied with doing everything within the country, in-house, within the capacity of the organization. But there have been changes. Like I said, in the case of ISRO, they are now slowly realizing that to meet the demands of the present world, it's not sufficient to do everything in-house. You have to go out to the industry, seek their partnerships, enter into more public and private enterprises to accomplish your missions. Thank you.
I see you have something.
Just one comment, and I'm suspicious that I've got an idea of what part of the executive summary you're referring to. We took great strides to make sure that this report had a balanced view of both sides, and we didn't want to put in a specific bias on it. We've seen some great successes with the strictly regulatory agencies. The thing that we found across almost all the agencies was a degree of autonomy in their structure and legislated power, I guess, was very closely related to how innovative and how flexible they were to adapt to the changing space environment, which I think is a very crucial point to remember, especially for the small agencies. As they grow, how quickly can they adapt to the changing economy?
Thank you, Steve. Well, this officially concludes the formal presentations for both teams. I think based on the amount of time that you guys had and the challenges, both teams did an outstanding job. So let's give them a big round of applause. I would like